Today's video is strictly for educational purposes. Anything mentioned here is neither endorsed nor supported by me. It's only meant for awareness and to keep you alert, so you understand things in depth. Because if you want to tell the difference between right and wrong, you first need to understand both. Half of the user base is under 25. They call it catching the bus, a callous euphemism for a final destination and a final decision. Behind the curtain of the First Amendment, two men have built a business model on your darkest hour. Today I'm unmasking the founders, the chemical manual, and the cold math of algorithmic exit. This is about Reddit's darkest subreddit called sanctioned suicide. My investigation on this video is done by collecting over a couple of hundred data points from Dartmouth College's machine learning research, the legal analysis of New York University, and the official enforcement filings of the United Kingdom's Communications Regulator Office, Ofcom. What you are about to hear is not speculation, it is documented architecture of despair, built in code, sustained by commerce, and protected by a 26-word law written in 1996, where the despairing log on and learn ways to die. That line appeared in New York Times, and it's not an exaggeration. The World Health Organization puts the global toll at 703,000 deaths by suicide every single year. For young people between the ages of 15 and 29, suicide is now the fourth leading cause of death. Not disease, not car accidents, suicide. These numbers are real and shocking by the time of this video, and I mean if you are watching this video after a couple of days, a couple of months, or a couple of years, these numbers may go up. And I want you to hold something in your mind as we go through this. A network so tightly wound that researchers described it using a term borrowed from physics, the small world property. A world where the most of isolated users turned out to be most dangerous, where the architecture of the web itself has been repurposed into something that functions mathematically as manual for the end. To understand how we got here, you have to go back further than most people realize. Long before social media, long before Reddit, long before TikTok or Discord, there was Usenet. Usenet was sprawling, ungoverned network discussion group that predated the modern internet as we know it. It was text-based, minimally moderated, and open to anyone with a connection. Inside Usenet, sometime in early 1990s, a news group appeared called alt.suicide.holiday, often shortened to ASH. It became the first major online gathering place where the people could openly discuss methods of ending their lives without moderation, without clinical oversight, and without legal consequence. ASH wasn't just a forum, it was a laboratory for language. The rhetorical framework that still dominates pro-suicide spaces today was invented there. Suicide was reframed as a rational choice. People who tried to intervene, therapists, family members, crisis counselors, were labeled as pro-lifers. Borrowing the language of the abortion debate, cast suicide prevention as a form of oppression. The act of dying was discussed using vocabulary of civil rights, autonomy, bodily sovereignty, the rights to choose. That framing wasn't organic. It was constructed deliberately by a small group of highly articulate users who understood that if you could control the language, you could control the narrative and moral framework. And if you could control the moral framework, you could make death feel like liberation. The specific terms that emerged from ASH are worth paying attention to because they are still in active use 30 years later. The concept of rational suicide, the idea that a clear-headed person could logically conclude that death is preferable to life, was codified there. The dismissal of psychiatric intervention as intimidating was normalized there. The idea that discussing methods openly was an act of solidarity rather than an act of harm was established there. Every pro-suicide platform that followed, every forum, every subreddit, every Discord channel inherited this lexicon. ASH was the source code. While ASH was building the language of self-destruction, something else was forming in a parallel corner of the internet. In 1997, a Canadian university student who went by the name Alana created a simple website. She called it the Involuntarily Celibacy Project. The idea was genuinely modest and well-intentioned, a space for people of all genders who struggled with romantic connection and loneliness to talk about their experiences. Alana herself has spoken publicly, years later, about how she envisioned it as inclusive, supportive, and open group for people. It was essentially a blog with comment section, and for a brief window, it was exactly what she intended. But the internet doesn't let you keep what you build. Over the years following, the concept of involuntarily celibacy, shortened to incel, was adopted and then colonized by communities of young men who transformed it into something Alana nirvana never imagined. The support space became a grievance machine. The inclusive forum became an exclusively male echo chamber defined by resentment toward women, toward genetically attractive men, and toward a society they believed had rigged the game against them from birth. The early 2000s saw the emergence of incel subcultures on forums like PUA-HATE, like PUA Hate, which originally critiqued pickup artist culture but gradually metastasized into something far darker. By the mid-2010s, the incel worldview had formed around a specific philosophical framework, the black pill. The black pill matters enormously to this case, so I want to be precise about what it means. In incel communities, there are three pills. The blue pill is the mainstream society's narrative, that everyone can find love, that personality matters more than looks, that the world is basically fair. The red pill is the idea that the world is unfair, but that you can game the system through self-improvement, manipulation, or strategic behavior. The black pill goes further. The black pill says that your genetic makeup, your bone structure, your height, your facial symmetry has already determined your fate, that no amount of self-improvement will change your fundamental position in social hierarchy, that the world is not just unfair but deterministically cruel, and that the logical endpoint of this realization is either rage or resignation. For some, the resignation becomes suicide. You see, because the same person who built the largest black pill community on the internet is the same person who built the largest suicide instruction forum. And that's not a coincidence, that's a proper business plan. The year 2003 brought one of the earliest cases that made the connection between online forums and the real world suicide deaths impossible for anyone to dismiss. Suzanne Susie Gonzalez was a 19-year-old college student in Florida. She had been active in the online discussion community, not one of today's platforms, but a predecessor with identical formation. On that forum, she discussed methods with other users. She received specific detailed guidance on what substances to obtain and how to use them. And through connections facilitated by that community, she acquired potassium cyanide, a chemical she would never have encountered in her normal life, never would have known how to source, and would never have understood how to use without the instruction she received online. She ingested it and she died. Her parents, Mike and Mary Gonzalez, did something that takes a kind of strength most people never have to summon. They didn't disappear into grief. They channeled it. They began lobbying, first their state legislators, the federal lawmakers, for a law that would make it crime to provide detailed method instruction online to someone you have reason to believe intends to use it. They testified before committees. They spoke to journalists. They built relationships with other families who had lost their children under similar circumstances, and they did this not for a year or two, but over 2 decades, more than 20 years of advocacy. The federal law they pushed for still doesn't exist, and the reasons why tell you everything about the legal fortress that protects these platforms, but we'll get to that. Between 2013 and 2018, a subreddit called Sanctioned Suicide operated openly on Reddit. It accumulated tens of thousands of subscribers. The community's philosophy was simple: provide a judgment-free space for people who were considering ending their lives. No forced optimism, no hopeful comfort messages, no crisis hotline numbers shoved into your face, just honest conversation among people who understood each other's pain. In practice, it was normalization engine. Users discussed methods with solid precision. They shared dosage calculations. They debated the relative effectiveness, meaning lethality of different approaches. The language of ASH was everywhere. Rational choice, pro-lifers, the framing of suicide prevention as domination. And the community enforced its norms rigorously. Users who expressed doubt, who tried to talk someone out of a decision, who posted crisis hotline numbers, they were downvoted, reported, and in many cases banned by moderators. The space wasn't neutral, it was curated to push in one direction. Reddit eventually banned the subreddit in March 2018 for violating its policies against the content that promotes or encourages self-harm. The ban was covered in media. It was treated as a conclusion, a platform doing the right thing, cleaning house, removing dangerous content. It was not a conclusion, it was starting gun. 4 days. That's how long the gap lasted. 4 days after Reddit shut down Sanctioned Suicide, the websites went live. This wasn't a spontaneous act by displaced users scrambling to find new home. It was pre-planned launch by 2 men who had been watching the subreddit, understanding its value, and waiting for exactly this moment. Diego Joaquin Galante, operating under the pseudonym Serge, based in Montevideo, Uruguay, and Lamarcus Small, operating under the pseudonym Marquis, based in Huntsville, Alabama. They registered registered the domain. They set up the server infrastructure, they migrated the community, and they opened for business. That word business is the one most investigations flinch away from. The standard narrative treats sanctioned suicide as tragedy, a dark corner of internet, a failure of moderation. Galante and Small didn't just build a suicide forum, they built a network of forums, and the suicide forum is just one node in that. Galante is also the operator of luxmax.org, one of the largest luxmaxing communities on the internet. If you haven't encountered luxmaxing, here's what it is on the surface. A subculture obsessed with physical self-improvement, bone structure analysis, cosmetic surgery discussion, rating systems for facial symmetry, jaw implants, canthal tilt, hunter eyes, an entire vocabulary built around the measurement and optimization of male appearance. On the surface, it looks like more extreme version of fitness culture. Underneath, it's something else entirely. Luxmax isn't self-improvement forum. It is saturated with black pill ideology. The foundational belief of the community is that your genetics have already determined your social and romantic destiny, and that while you can optimize at the margins, a better jawline, clearer skin, you cannot escape the fundamental hierarchy that nature imposed on you at birth. The forum's rating system don't just measure appearance, they measure fate. A low rating system isn't a suggestion to hit a gym, it's a verdict. And for users who internalize that verdict, who came to believe after months or years of immersion in the community that they are genetically condemned to loneliness and rejection, the black pill offers only two endpoints: rage or resignation, violence or suicide. Galante operates Luxmax, where young men, many of them teenagers, are systematically taught that their lives are genetically programmed to be miserable. And Galante simultaneously operates sanctioned suicide as well, where those same young men can find detailed instructions on how to end those lives, those miserable lives that people on the other forum told them so. The infrastructure is shared, the user bases overlap, the ideological progression is built into the architecture, from self-improvement to despair to method instruction, from you'll never be good enough to here's how to catch the bus. The jargon tells the same story more clearly than anyone else's can. On sanctioned suicide, users don't say suicide, they say CTB, catching the bus. This synonym is psychological. It strips the act of its weight. It makes the discussion of death feels casual, almost logistical, like planning a commute. SN is sodium nitrate, the forum's preferred method and wordings, which we'll examine in detail shortly. SI is suicidal ideation. Goodbye threads are farewell posts written by users who have decided to die, often within hours or days. And then there are FOID, short for femoid, a dehumanizing term for women imported directly from incel forums. The fact that FOID appears regularly on a suicide forum should stop you cold. It's a linguistic fingerprint. It tells you that the users moving through sanctioned suicide are not a random cross-section of people in crisis. A significant portion of them are men who arrived through the incel pipeline, through luxmarks.org, through black pill communities, through spaces where they were taught that their suffering was caused by women and by genetic destiny. The misogyny and the self-destructiveness are not separate acts. They are two expressions of the same worldview, and they are being cultivated by the same operators on the same servers for the same commercial purposes. The commercial purpose runs on attention, page views, time on the site, ad impressions, donations, etc. These forums generate revenue through advertising, through users' donations, and through sheer volume of engagement that a community of desperate people produces. A user in a crisis doesn't check the forum once and leave. They come back. They check for replies to their posts. They read reviews to the new threads. They respond to other users' goodbye threads. The notification system pulls them back every time someone interacts with their content. Every notification is a touch point. Every touch point is a page view. Every page view is monetizable. The business model doesn't depend on users getting better. It depends on users staying engaged on the page, and the most engaged users are the ones closest to death. The academic research on sanctioned suicide goes far deeper than content analysis. Researchers at Dartmouth College and Emory University didn't just read posts and categorize them. They built machine learning models that treated the entire forum as mathematical object, a network graph where every user is a node and every interaction is an edge connecting two nodes. They analyzed the structural properties of this graph using tools from network science, and what they found was genuinely disturbing. The inbuilt assumption most people have about online risk is that the most at-risk users are the most visible, the ones posting constantly, engaging in the biggest threats, making themselves known. The data shows the opposite. The users at high risk, classified in the research as highest risk users or HRU, had a very specific and instinctive mathematical signature. They exhibit high transitivity and low density. Transitivity in network terms measures how interconnected a user's contacts are with each other. If I talk to you and I talk to someone else and you two also talk to each other, that's a transitive relationship. High transitivity means you are interacting inside a tight group where everyone knows everyone. Low density means that the group is isolated from the rest of the network. The users aren't participating in the broader forum community, they are in a bubble. So what this means in human terms is that the most at-risk users had retreated into small groups, 3, 4, 5 people who talked almost exclusively to each other every day. They reinforced each other's hopelessness. They validated each other's plans. They shared methods in details in private messages that the broader community never saw. And because the group was isolated from the rest of the forum, no outside voice, no moderator, no hesitant user, no one expressing doubt could penetrate the group. The echo chamber sealed itself. The researchers call this the small world property, borrowing the concept from network science first described by mathematician Duncan Watts and socialist Stephen Strogaard in 1998. In small world network, most nodes aren't directly connected to each other, but any node can reach any other node through a short chain of mediators. The network has clusters, tightly connected groups, linked by thin bridges. The forum's structure matched this pattern almost exact, and the most dangerous cluster were the smallest, the tightest, and the most isolated. The second metric that predicted risk was in-degree centrality, essentially how many other users were reaching out to a specific person. A user with high in-degree centrality and high transitivity was someone being actively contacted by members of their tight cluster. They were the focal point of the group's attention, and when the researchers tracked these users over time, they found that the combination of high transitivity, low density, and high in-degree centrality was a statistically significant predictor of that user going on to post goodbye thread, report acquiring lethal means, or disappear from the forum entirely, an outcome the researchers coded as probable death. 192 users were tracked in the Dartmouth study with level of roughness. Each one was a data point in a model that could see the trajectory unfolding, the transitivity score climbing, the cluster tightening, the language shifting from hypothetical to concrete, from I've been thinking about it to I have everything I need. The algorithm could see it happening, and the forum's architecture kept pushing. Thread updates in real time, the social reinforcement of a community that treated hesitation as weakness and certainty as courage. The Dartmouth researchers modeled the progression of suicidal ideation on the forum as a non-linear process with 3 stages. The first stage being passive ideation, thinking about the death in abstract terms, wishing to not exist, fantasize about disappearing. The second stage is active ideation, researching specific methods, engaging with instructional content, asking questions about dosages and timelines. And the last one is decided, which means acquiring materials, writing goodbye threads, setting dates. The forum's social mechanics, its notification system, its community norms, its group structure function to move users from passive to active to decided. Not always linearly, users could move back and forth between stages, but the forum's social pressure constantly and consistently biased towards moving forward. And once a users enter a high transitivity cluster of other decided users, the probability of reversal dropped sharply. The cluster became a closed system, accelerating towards a single outcome. And here's the architectural detail that most reporting misses entirely. The forum's moderators didn't just passively allow this to happen. They actively curated the environment to facilitate it. Posts expressing doubt, what the community called pro-life content, were flagged, removed, and the users who posted them were warned or banned. If someone responded to a goodbye thread with "please don't do this" or "have you talked to someone," that response was treated as a violation of community norms. The moderators enforced a one-directional culture. You could discuss methods, you could encourage someone's resolve, you could share detailed chemical instructions, but you could not suggest that someone might want to live. That was the one thing the judgment-free space would not tolerate. Daniel Del Canto was one of the users whose story eventually became public public through investigation journalism. A young man who posted on a forum during a period of deep crisis. One of his posts contained a line that haunts everyone who reads it. Is a part of me just desperately hanging on. 9 words, and those 9 words capture the exact moment that the forum is architecturally designed to exploit. The proven literature on suicide is definitive. On this point, the vast majority of people who die by suicide are unsure until very late in the process. They do not want to die with cold certainty. They are caught in between wanting the pain to stop and wanting to live. That doubt is the window where interference works. It is the crack where the crisis counselor, a friend, a family member, a stranger on a hotline can reach through and pull someone back. The entire field of suicide prevention is built on the existence of that window. When Danielle posted that question, he wasn't met with a crisis counselor. He wasn't met with someone who said, yes, hold on to that part. He was met with peers who had already passed through the uncertainty and emerged on the other side, the decided side. The social reinforcement pushed in one direction. The responses validated the part of him that wanted to let go, the part that was hanging on, part that was asking a question, reaching out, still uncertain. That part was treated as an obstacle to be overcome, not a lifeline to be strengthened. The method that the forum has systematically popularized deserves its own examination, because the story of sodium nitrate is the story of how a suicide forum doesn't just facilitate death, it optimizes it. Sodium nitrate is a chemical compound with the formula NaNO2. It's used commercially as meat preservative, a food additive, and an industrial chemical, and that lethal dose is disturbingly small. Before sanctioned suicide popularized sodium nitrate as a method of self-harm, it was virtually unknown. In this context, the National Poison Data System in the US tracks every reported exposure to toxic substances year by year. The data shows a sharp, statistically significant inflection point beginning around 2019, the same period when discussion of sodium nitrate exploded on the forum. The CDC's Wonder database, the wide-ranging online data for epidemiologic research system, verifies this with mortality data showing an increase in poisoning deaths among adolescents and young adults that tracks temporarily and geographically with the forum's growth and reach. The forum doesn't just mention sodium nitrate, it provides a comprehensive instructional framework, threads, detailed specific dosage calculations based on body weight. They recommend the anti-emetic protocols, specific medications to prevent vomiting because the body's natural response to ingesting a toxic substance is to eject it. The forum's guidelines and instructions instruct users to take anti-nausea medication before ingesting the sodium nitrate, specifically to prevent the body's last line of defense from functioning. And here's the framing that nobody else is using, and it is the framing that matters the most. The forum doesn't just encourage suicide, it upgrades its lethality. Researchers who study method substitution have established a critical finding. When a suicidal person cannot access their preferred method, many of them do not simply switch to another method. Many survive. Many enter a cooling-off period where the acute crisis passes. Many encounter an intervention point, a conversation, a hospitalization, a moment of clarity that changes their trajectory. Method restriction saves lives. This is one of the well-supported findings in all of suicide prevention research. It's why bridge barriers work. It's why gun shortage laws reduce suicide rates. It's why limiting pack sizes of over-the-counter painkillers in the UK led to a measurable drop in overdose deaths. The forum short-circuits this. It takes users who might have attempted with less lethal means, methods with high survival rates, methods where medical interventions can still work if the person is found in time, and redirects them towards sodium nitrate, which has a dramatically lower survival rate. The data on youth method shifts is telling. Over the period corresponding to the forum's growth, there has been a measurable shift among young people away from firearms, which, while highly lethal, require a physical access to a weapon that may be locked, stored, or absent, and toward poisoning and suffocation. The forum actively facilitates this shift by providing detailed instruction on a method that is cheap, easily accessible, and difficult to survive. This is lethality upgrade. The forum isn't just encouraging people to die, it's making their deaths more efficient, more certain, and harder to prevent. And when someone dies, the forum doesn't honor them. It cleans up. Digital obstruction is the term for what happens after a confirmed death on the platform. When the user's family or law enforcement attempt to access the deceased person's account, to read their final post, to understand who they were talking to reconstruct the sequence of events that led to their death, a timeline, they find the account locked or deleted. Final messages disappear. Private conversations are wiped. The forum's administrators systematically restrict accounts after a confirmed death, removing the digital trial that could help a coroner understand what happened. A grieving parent piece together their child's last days. The forum protects itself by raising the proof of its own influence. Every locked account is a closed investigation. Every deleted private message thread is a conversation that a jury will never see. The law in the US is a fortress around this operation, and the fortress has two walls. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act was enacted in 1996. It contains 26 words that have defined the legal landscape of the internet for nearly 3 decades. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. In plain language, a platform is not legally responsible for what its users post. The site does not write the sodium nitrate guide. A user did. The platform did not tell Daniel Del Canto to stop hanging on. Other users did. Under Section 230, the platform bears no liability for hosting that content, distributing it, or amplifying it through its notification system and algorithmic recommendation features. And here is the part that makes lawyers tear their hair out. It doesn't matter that the platform moderators actively curate the environment. Section 230 was originally intended to encourage platforms to moderate content by shielding them from liability regardless of whether they chose to moderate or not. The perverse result is that a platform can remove posts encouraging someone to live, can actively suppress a pro-life content while leaving methods guidelines untouched, and still qualify for Section 230 protection. The editorial discretion doesn't transform the platform into a publisher. Under the statute, it remains an in-between, a neutral pipeline through which user-generated content flows. The First Amendment adds the second wall. Even if Section 230 were reformed or revoked tomorrow, even if Congress passed a law stripping platform for this specific category of content, any attempt to criminalize the speech itself would face a constitutional challenge. The First Amendment protects speech, including deeply offensive and disturbing speech, unless it falls into one of a narrow set of historically recognized exceptions: true threats, stimulation to imminent lawless action, obscenity, or speech integral to criminal conduct. A forum posted that says, "Here is how to use sodium nitrate to die," is under current First Amendment precedent very likely protected speech. Its information, the fact that the information is lethal, doesn't automatically remove its constitutional protection. Courts have been extremely reluctant to cut a new category of unprotected speech, and the Supreme Court explicitly declined to do so in U.S. versus Stevens in 2010 case, stating that the court would not adopt a free-floating test for First Amendment coverage. The Marcus Small in Huntsville, Alabama, sits behind both of these shields. Federal law protects the platform. The Constitution protects the speech. Alabama has no state law specifically targeting the operation of suicide instruction websites. He remains largely anonymous, shielded by his pseudonym, insulated by his jurisdiction. Galante in Montevideo, Uruguay, adds a third wall: international jurisdiction. Even if a U.S. court issued an order against the forum, a cease and desist, an injunction, a criminal indictment, enforcing it against a server operator in Uruguay requires international legal cooperation, diplomatic channels, processes that takes months or years to execute against a website that can migrate to a new hosting provider in hours, register a new domain in minutes, and resume operations before the ink on the court order is dry. Galante has publicly denied responsibility for the deaths connected to the platform. He has framed the forum as harm reduction space, a place where people who are going to die anyway can at least access information that reduces their suffering. That framing deserves direct confrontation because it is intellectually dishonest. Harm reduction in every legitimate public health context is about reducing risk while keeping people alive. Needle exchange program reduce overdose deaths by providing clean equipment. Methadone clinics reduce opioid fatalities by providing supervised alternatives. Safe injection sites reduce death by placing medical professionals in proximity to active drug users. Every single harm reduction intervention in public health share a common goal: fewer deaths. Sanctioned suicide does not reduce deaths. It provides anti-emetic protocols specifically designed to prevent the body's last defense mechanism, vomiting, from saving the person's life. It shifts users from survivable methods to unsurvivable ones. Calling that harm reduction is like calling a sniper scope a safety device because it improves accuracy. The farm doesn't reduce harm, it optimizes lethality. And and Gilanti knows it. In November 2022, US lawmakers introduced a Stop Online Suicide Assistant Forum Act in the House of Representatives. The bill was a direct response to the deaths linked to sanctioned suicide and similar platforms. It specifically targeted platforms that provided detailed method instructions to individuals that the platforms has reason to believe are suicidal. The drafters tried to thread the constitutional needle, not banning speech broadly, not creating a new category of unprotected expression, but creating a civil liability for a specific, narrow category of assistance. The bill drew on a legal theory that provides step-by-step lethal instruction to someone you know is in crisis is not mere speech but something closer to aiding and abetting. The bill faced immediate opposition. Free speech advocates argued it would chill genuine discussion of end-of-life issues. Technology industry groups argued it would create impossible moderation burdens. Constitutional scholars were divided on whether it could survive judicial review. The bill stalled in the committee. It has not become law. The Gonzalez family, Mike and Mary, who have been fighting since 2003, since their daughter Susie was killed by potassium cyanide sourced through an online forum, continues to lobby. The UK took a fundamentally different path, rooted in fundamentally different legal tradition. The UK does not have a First Amendment. It does not treat speech as a near absolute right. And in the wake of several high-profile deaths linked to online content, including the case of Molly Russell, a 14-year-old who died in 2017 after extensive exposure to self-harm and suicide content on Instagram and Pinterest, the UK Parliament passed the Online Safety Act, which received royal approval in October 2023 and has been implemented in stages since then. The Online Safety Act does something no American law does. It places a duty of care on platforms, not a suggestion, not a guideline, a legally enforceable obligation to protect users, particularly children, from content that is illegal or that possesses a risk of significant harm. And crucially, this duty applies to any platforms with UK users, regardless of where the platform is based or where its users are located. A website operated from Uruguay and Alabama, if it has users in the UK, falls within Ofcom's regulatory jurisdiction under the Act. In April 2025, Ofcom opened its first formal investigation under the Online Safety Act, directly targeting sanctioned suicide. The investigation cited evidence that the forum was accessible to UK users, that it contained content founding offences under the Suicide Act 1961, which criminalized the encouragement or assistance of suicide, and that the platform had taken no meaningful steps to prevent UK users, including minors, from accessing that content. The forum's response was a masterclass in performative obedience. On July 1, 2025, Sanctioned Suicide implemented a geographic IP filter that blocked connections from UK-based internet addresses. On paper, this looked like cooperation. Users in the UK would see the blockage page. The forum could claim it had complied with UK law by excluding UK users from its audience. Ofcom's investigators weren't fooled. Within weeks, they identified mirror sites, duplicate or near-duplicate versions of the forum hosted at the different URLs, accessible from the UK without restriction. The same content, the same user base, the same method guidelines, just a different web address. The IP block was theater, a costume, and Ofcom's documented it as such. The Online Safety Act gives Ofcom a toolbox that no American regulator possesses. Beyond fines and enforcement notices, the Act authorizes what are called business disruption measures. These are not directed at the forum itself because, as we've established, you can't easily shut down a website operated from two different countries that can migrate hosting in hours. Instead, they are directed at the services the forum depends on: payment processors, hosting providers, domain registrars, advertising networks, content delivery networks. The logic is straightforward. If you can't reach the website, reach its infrastructure, cut the payment processors, and you cut the revenue. These measures have not been fully implemented against sanctioned suicide as of the recording of this video, but Ofcom has publicly signaled its willingness to use them, and the legal authority is in place. Whether they'll be effective against operators who can accept cryptocurrency, who can use bulletproof hosting hosting providers in jurisdictions beyond Ofcom's reach who can rotate domains faster than regulators can file orders? That's the open question. The UK framework represents the most aggressive regulatory posture any government has taken against this specific type of platform. Whether aggression translates to efficacy is a different matter entirely. Research has demonstrated a statistically significant correlation between increased search volume for pro-suicide websites and real-world shifts in suicide methods among young people. When sanctioned suicide popularize sodium nitrate, that spread doesn't stay contained with the forum. It radiates outward through search queries that led new users to the site, through social media posts that reference the forum without naming it directly, through YouTube videos that dance around platform content policies while pointing viewers toward the source material. The algorithm doesn't understand the context. It understands clicks, and content about death generates clicks. A detailed method guide is from the algorithm's perspective and point of view high-performing content. The system rewards it with visibility. The standard response to this is helpline notice. You search for certain terms and a blue box appears at the top of the result. If you or someone you know is in crisis, call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988. The intention is good. The effectiveness is limited. Studies examining the impact of these notices have found limited evidence that they meaningfully redirect users who are already deep in the search process. A person who has moved from passive to active ideation, who is searching for specific dosage information, specific substance names, specific protocols, is not typically redirected by a phone number in a blue box. The involvement arrives too late in cognitive process, and it lacks two things the forum provides: specificity and social connection. The forum answers your exact question. The helpline box asks you to call a stranger. For a user who has spent weeks or months in community that claims to understand their pain, the helpline box isn't competition. It's an afterthought. The machine learning models developed at Dartmouth point out directly towards a fundamentally different kind of intervention. If you can mathematically identify the network signatures of highest risk users, the high transitivity, the low density, the clustering into small groups of mutually reinforcing peers, then you can, in theory, detect risk before it becomes action. The Dartmouth models achieved significant predictive accuracy in identifying users who would go on to post goodbye threads, report acquiring lethal means, or disappear from the platform itself. The math works, but deploying those methods in practice raises questions that does not have clean answers. Who runs the models? On whose servers? With whose data? Under whose authority? The same privacy framework that prevent law enforcement from accessing forum accounts also prevent researchers from deploying real-time monitoring tools without the platform's cooperation, and sanctioned suicide will not cooperate. The forum's operators have every incentive to keep the data opaque, the accounts logged, and the network structure hidden from outside analysis. The researchers who built these models worked with publicly accessible data, posts, and interactions visible to anyone who created an account. The private messages, the encrypted channels, the closed groups where the highest risk interactions actually occur, that data remains in the dark. There is a tension at the heart of this that doesn't resolve into a clean conclusion. The forum's users are real people in genuine pain. Many are living with treatment-resistant depression, chronic illness, social isolation, disability, and trauma that the conventional mental illness system has failed to address. They have sat on waiting lists for months. They have been turned away by insurance. They have been prescribed medications that didn't work and therapies they couldn't afford. And then they found a place on the internet where someone finally seemed to understand, where they didn't have to perform wellness, where they could say, "I want to die," without being involuntarily committed. The word sanctioned in the forum's name carries the weight of the entire operation. It implies a permission, endorsement. This was a stamp of authority on a decision that every major medical, psychological, and public health institution in the world classifies as entirely preventable. The forum reframes suicide not as the result of illness, but as an exercise of freedom. And for someone in the grip of suicide ideation, a state that distorts cognition, narrows perception, and makes permanent solution feel like the only rational response to temporary suffering. That reframing is extremely dangerous. The forum calls it catching the bus, as if death is a departure, a scheduled service, something that arrives on time and carries you somewhere better. It's not. It's a permanent response to a temporary state, facilitated by a business model that profits from a journey to a terminal. The founders built the road, the algorithm drives the bus, and the law, for now, keeps the engine running. If you or someone you know is in crisis, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available 24/7. Call or text 988. In the UK, contact the Samaritans at the 116123 number. You are not a data point. You are not a network node, and your darkest hour is not a business opportunity. Stay vigilant. Think about your parents and your loved ones. I will see you in the next video. If you like the content, do subscribe to the channel. Until then, goodbye and good night.